made a comment a couple years ago that I was not convinced that a political appointee at USDA had ever made the walk from the Whitman building across 14th Street to the Yates building where the U.S. Forest Service designed. And this really feels like a recognition of the need for some real oversight on the Forest Service process and some continued direction on how those folks on the ground that are really trying to do the best for their producers, I think, by and large, can do that with the backing of the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture to make the appropriate decision, have the flexibility to work with producers on the ground, deal with the drought conditions, to make the right choice to unlock more of that grazing land so that we can manage it properly, so that we can lower those fuel loads. The Secretary did a great job laying out all of the reasons why that flexibility in this decision to manage the multiple uses is so critical to the Western ranching industry. So this is a real solid step in the right direction towards really making sure Forest Service fast and ground. We know that the environmentalists are going to sue you when you make the appropriate decision. We know you're going to have those challenges and the department's going to have your back. And that's a critical step that we haven't seen in the past. We're incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah. How do you see this moving forward? Being put into action. We really talk about those ranchers getting on this ground.
Look, this is still going to be a very human scale conversation because the greatest, range con in the world works right next to the worst. And those relationships are so hyper-local. We look back to the Charles and Maud's situation in South Dakota. I can tell stories about being there years ago and hearing about that sort of law enforcement mentality amongst Forest Service personnel in the region, right? It's not the whole country, it's there. And so I think that as this really becomes the culture shift at Forest Service, that's going to mean, areas that say, great, we've been waiting for this kind of support to do the right thing. And there are going to be other areas where that's probably going to be a longer slog. But I think that's the long and hard process of making the federal government smaller, more effective, and less burdensome to producers' lives.
We've had people looking now, here in the audience and watching maybe at home. The benefits of this, what this really means in real life terms for the industry, and maybe for new guys that are getting into the industry. We all talk about our American producers that are aging out, getting a new producer. It is awfully expensive for them to go ahead and buy land and raise cattle. Speak to the benefits. How does this help?
In the West, it's really hard to get enough grazing land for cattle production at scale without that federal interface, a lot of places state interface as well, like BLM or Forest Service. I remember being at a meeting at the Department of Interior back in the first Trump administration, Secretary Lincoln. This is a great example of what ranchers have to deal with in those Western areas. It was a huge room of people who have to work with the National Environmental Policy, regulated by some NEPA process. And there was a guy there that was representing a group that had done the Barrier Gap electrical transmission line, multi-state, massive, high-voltage electrical project on the East Coast. He was complaining about the fact that it had taken 3 years to get the EA or the EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, done on the project. And I sat at the table and said, we have cattle producers with 100 years of continuous stewardship of a resource that are waiting 10 or 15 years to get a grazing permit. That is absolutely a continuation of the same use, and there's some component Forest Service system. And so there's a real mismatch there. And so making these steps to make sure that when they talk about flexibility, they talk about the need to make those decisions close to the resource. That's what we're talking about. Common sense being injected back. Or maybe the first.
Well, common sense also, but also benefits to the environment as well. Benefits to it. We often talk about fire mitigation. This also plays into that.
Right.
A lot of benefits to this.
It's really important to understand, we talk about this in the cattle industry a lot. You don't get to do conservation without balance in North America. It is a purpose-built resource, the most effective tool possible. So many environments is raising cattle in a responsible way, using it as a tool, sequestering carbon, lowering fuel loads, creating habitat for wildlife. All of these tremendous benefits that you lose and can't replicate if cattle aren't doing what they do on the rangeland. So it's really a needed step to manage those resources appropriately. It's a budget helper for the Forest Service and by extension for BLM as well. So that's a real on the ground impact, but without that flexibility, it really does make it difficult, particularly for younger producers, as you mentioned, trying to break into this. And you already have the cost of land, but then you have the drought that we've been dealing with for so many years now. You mentioned earlier on this program the 20-year mega drought. I'm 47 years old, and I feel like we've been in a drought in my home state of Arizona all 47 of those years, So, that's such a default position for our producers. It really matters when you have all of this really violent grazing land that's not available for production simply because there's a paperwork process that somebody didn't want to start or couldn't finish or got sued. So the ability to clean some of that away and say, this is something that somebody can use and put to use to grow further, that's a huge step forward.
That's an urge to the benefits of the environment. We heard Senator Lummis talking about the grizzly bear and the issues they're facing. Let's talk ESA and gray wolves. I know this is something you're very passionate about. This is something that has been ongoing, and there's a lot of history there with the gray wolves and ESA dating back to the 60s. Give us a little background on it.
Yeah, the gray wolf is, we talk about iconic species under the endangered species, charismatic species, right? They inspire something, or there's something that captures the attention of the American people, particularly those that don't have to live with them, by and large. And it's much easier to find the positive for the gray wolf when you live in a condo in downtown Denver. But if you're dealing with it out on the ground, pressuring your wildlife, that situation changes very, very quickly. We're in an area now where we've seen rapid expansion of wolf populations in the West. You look at California producers now that have lost 70, 80 calves this season alone. It's getting to be a critical point. And what's fascinating about it is, I always talk about the Endangered Species Act as a roach motel. Those old commercials, species check in, but they never check out. You can't ever get the process done because the litigation crowd comes in very, very quickly, attacks the process, attacks every element of implementing delisting, and by and large, there's a really high success rate in the return. The gray wolf is one of the only species under the Endangered Species Act history that both Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, going all the way back to the Obama administration, the breed is ready for delisting. Scientifically, you're done here. There are plenty of wolves in North America. There are a ton in Canada. There are 6,000 or so here in the United States. And that matrix of listings is now so bifurcated. You have different distinct population segments with Great Lakes involved in that population. You have a growing aggressive population in the Pacific Northwest. And then you have populations in Montana, Wyoming, places like that. And through the course of the years, in these different decisions are states where they can manage those wolves in state. And what we know from that is, boy, does that work better than the alternative. Those populations are thriving. What a shock, right? That under state management, closer to the ground, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So, it really is sort of the figurehead species under the ESA from our perspective of most vulnerable endangered species. Everybody agrees the species is ready for delisting, yet here we sit. Waiting on the Pet and Livestock Protection Act in the Senate, there is a bill to fix this that has already moved through the House. This is fixable right now in this Congress, but we need the Senate to step up and do their job to help the Department of Interior fix this problem. Otherwise they will get right back in that court.
I know we're running out of time here, but I do want to mention, before I let you go, we have to address legal schema.
Yeah.
Can this be overstated? What kind of issue are we looking at? How concerned are producers?
Well, I was thinking about the fact that, we now are a couple years into this New World screwworm response. And as the Secretary said earlier, a year ago, we were all under the impression that by August of last year, New World screwworm would be here in the United States. Through, Herculean efforts by the Department of Agriculture, working with the Mexican government, getting those flies that we're generating right now down in Copeg and Panama, on that leading edge of the diversion over the last year and a half, slowing that move northward. While, producers here in Texas, the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, TCFA, Texas Cattle Feeders, Texas Farm Bureau, all through that Texas Screwworm Coalition, using that knowledge from fighting this the last time, working with the USDA. We have tools now. We have resources. We have screwworm production facilities coming online. We have emergency use authorizations for drugs for producers to use in combat. We have education going out into the field. We have all of those tools coming to bear. What a credit to Secretary Rollins, to Undersecretary Hoskins and their team. Much more, this group has really done Herculean work, working with us, working with industry to get a plan together. And now that we have screwworm here in the U.S., it's time to put that plan into action. We will undoubtedly, find some hiccups. We will iron those out and get to a place where we can manage this and start pushing it back out in Mexico. But a lot of credit to all the work that's been done by producers here in Texas, and the Secretary and her team, and my team as well, for all the work that's been done to get us to this point. We could be a lot worse off than we are. We're ready to deal with this. This is an animal health issue. This is not a food safety issue. It's not a consumer-facing issue. But we have the tools we didn't have a year ago.
Thank you so much. NCBA.